Oh, I should have opened my. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Once again, I'm here with my dear friend Zakib Hussain, and Sheikh Suhaib Saeed will be joining us shortly. He's putting a baby to sleep. So we're going to excuse that absence. But also, before we start, a little bit of interesting special effects technology that I want to show you guys. So Zakib has this really cool grammar mug, and every time he drinks it, there's a darkness that takes over the room. So watch this, guys. How sick is that? How sick is that? And then
it's to bring all the focus on the grammar
on the mug,
right? Which is
there's some evil drink that
So if people were angry at me for drinking during Ramadan,
now there's something wrong with what he's saying. Okay, anyway, so we left off when we got cut off. You were talking about a few things that you wanted to point out, and I just want you to remind me what verse number we were on in the Genesis sequence, so that I'm in the right place.
Yeah, let me bring it up here. So this is verses 13
okay
onwards.
So let me read them on real quick again, so that people are back with us, so that we can take your comments in and really process them. Okay, so and he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and went out. And so when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called out to the people of the house and said to them, saying, "See, he has brought us a Hebrew man to play with us. He came into me to lie with me, and I called out in a loud voice. And so when he heard me raise my voice and call out, he left his garment by me and fled and went out."
Okay.
So that's
and maybe just one more verse, and she laid out.
Okay, and she laid out his garment by her until his master returned to his house.
Okay, great. So there's so much interesting stuff going on here. So this is fascinating, I think. So the first thing is, we already mentioned that she's bringing up his nationality, right? That he is a Hebrew, and he has designs on an Egyptian woman. How dare he? Right. So he's committing a crime anyway, and then he's this lowly foreigner committing this crime, which wasn't an issue up till now. So she's bringing it up, just like she's bringing up the fact that technically he's a slave, whatever his rank in the house may be. Right. And then the second thing is, as we'll note, as we continue reading over the next couple of verses, she says almost verbatim the same thing to her husband when he gets back, except you see there's this conspicuous silence on the part of the servants when she's addressing them, and whereas the husband kind of flies into a rage. And I think that's really significant, that that kind of absence of a reaction from the servants is, I think, really as a really clever literary effect. So you kind of have this picture of her gathering the servants and saying, "Guess what he just tried to do to me?" And all the servants saying, "Yeah, that's what happened, sure." So this complete silence, because that silence is really brought out when you see the husband, because the husband flies into a rage, whereas the servants just kind of embarrassingly just stand there saying, "Sure, okay." So that
because they know her, and they
know him. He's the head of the household, so they know him, and whereas he's sort of the husband, sort of he's given all of his affairs over to Joseph. He's sort of out of the house, and obviously it's his wife, so there's more of a bias for him to believe her anyway. So that's really interesting. So that suggests that the servants kind of know what's happening. And then on top of that, right, she's shown them her garment, or his garment that she has in her hand. All right. So this, the Quranic version here, I think, if read in light of the Genesis passage, solves a really interesting problem, which is that if the doors are locked or if the house is empty, where does the shahid come from? And if we can take I don't know how much of a leap this is. I think this is plausible. If we take seriously this idea that the servants aren't really taking her very seriously, and she's shown them her garment, the garment that she has taken from Joseph, and she's just keeping it there with her anyway, so the servants can see the garment. So when the witness says to Potiphar, to her husband, "Look, if it's ripped from the back, then she's in the wrong," I think it's very plausible that they've already seen it, that it's ripped from the back. So this is just a polite way of letting the husband know that, look at the garment. It's not like a scientific exercise that he's engaged in, that, oh, okay, I know about these things. If it's the man who's assaulting the woman, then this is how the garment rips. And if it's the woman who's assaulting the man, I don't think it's that at all. It's just the servants have seen the garment, they know what the situation is already, and they're just finding a tactful way of letting the husband know this is what's really going on.
So I'll share a few things with you here. The first thing that I noticed in the reading of these verses is that there's a repetition in her words. So when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called out to the people, see, he has brought, and all of that. And then the left his garment by me and fled. And the left his garment by me, left his garment in her hand. There's a repetition of the phrase. And interestingly, in the Quran, there's an almost unusual in kana qamisuhu qudda min dubur wa in kana qamisuhu qudda min qubul, and before that qaddat qamisahu min dubur. So there's the and falamma ra'a qamisahu qudda min dubur. So there's like that phrase has been repeated unusually, and there's a kind of a recurring repetition with an emphasis on the garment here, but it's echoed in completely reverse terms in the Quran, where instead of her claim linchpinned on the shirt, like her claim to validity is the shirt here, and in the Quran it's completely reverse engineered. Her claim has been dismantled by the shirt, so it's been reversed. So that's a really interesting, contrast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Glad you could join us. Alhamdulillah. Hopefully the baby got some good sleep. Inshallah.
She's conked out.
Okay. I'll tell you some baby stories later. But okay, so that's the first thing about the repetitions. So we're on I think 13 onwards or 12 onwards in the Genesis reading. The second thing that it's slipping me right now is she let her garment. I don't know if it'll come to me now. Yeah, no, that's the first thing that came to my head. There was something else, but it's slipping me now, so I'll wait till later. So you want to keep reading on then?
No, there's so much more going on.
Okay,
here.
Good. Absolutely.
We need to pause if you
yes.
So you'll notice that there's in the Genesis passage, there's no story of the women of the city and their involvement and the banquet incident and the kind of cutting the hands with a knife incident. There's none of that in Genesis, right? The definitive work on this is James Kugel's In Potiphar's House. So he's done a really good job of tracing that story and noticing all the different places that it arises. So it's really interesting that the first kind of place we really see that story in any sort of written form is in the Quran and a few rabbinic texts around the time of the Quran, probably just after the Quran, like the Midrash Tanhuma, and then some medieval Jewish texts as well, like Midrash Haggadah. So
put that in simple terms. The earliest time we found the story of the women cutting their hands, arguably, is the Quran, and then some Jewish texts immediately after the Quran.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right. Immediately after, and then into the kind of medieval period as well. So immediately after, and then a few centuries later as well. So now, I guess your first reaction might be, well, okay, they just took it from the Quran, right? But what James Kugel did, I think he does this very convincingly, is show that there were actually several different traditions of this story that were around even prior to the Quran. So it's definitely the case that the later Jewish texts are taking stuff from the Quran, taking stuff from the Islamic tradition. Like the name Zuleikha ends up in Jewish text, which obviously isn't the Quran, but it forms part of the Islamic tradition.
Right.
About the name of Potiphar's wife who tried to seduce him. So and that's a very Persian name. How does that end up in the Jewish text? Clearly, they're being influenced by the Islamic tradition. So yes, the Quranic version of the story is influencing what's ending up in these Jewish texts, but at the same time, he shows that there was definitely a version of the story around prior to the Quran, which is also influencing what's in this Jewish text. Okay, so now the question is, how did this version sort of arise, and what is its history? So the version kind of arises as an attempt to explain some interesting things in the Hebrew text. So if you go back to Genesis,
Yeah.
verse 14 says, "See, he has brought a Hebrew man to play with us." So we mentioned the play on the word to play, right? To laugh at us, to mock us, with the threat that with kind of the suggestion there to
The indecent overtone in it.
to be
Yeah.
indecent of us, right? But
Yeah.
she says to play with us, right? So this is something that the rabbis noticed, not to play with me, to play with us. So already there was already in the pre-Islamic period, they picked up on this sudden use of the plural and said maybe she's accusing him of not only being indecent towards her, but saying he's done this to all of us, right? He's such a despicable character, such a lecherous character. He would assault you servants as well as me. So this was kind of the first thing.
Perhaps it can be read that way. I would also argue the Quran uses the collective ahlika, which ahl can refer to a single person, but can refer to an entire family.
Right.
And perhaps maybe even insinuating that her honor is a representation of everybody's. So
I think exactly,
an affront to me is an affront to all of us.
And it's a way of trying to get all the servants on side, right?
Right.
The fact that she's calling him a Hebrew, the fact that she's reminding that he's just a slave. So this is just I think in the actual text, in the original text, is definitely a way of her just trying to get them on side. But the way it started being read was, no, she's also saying that he's being indecent to all of us. That was just the way it started to be interpreted. And then one other thing that's interesting is it says, see, he has brought a Hebrew man to play with us, right? Ra'u. And that again is the plural. So again, there was some speculation about, so you have to understand how sort of rabbinic exegesis works. There's a lot of overlaps with the way tafsir works, but there's a lot of differences as well. So one of the things that I think is an overlap is sort of paying attention to every word and just trying to milk it for everything it's worth and say, okay, what can we learn about the text from this word? And they said, well, look, it says si, ra'u. And they didn't just want to say, look at this shirt. They wanted to make it more fantastical than that. They've already had this idea of us. So she's sort of talking to the women servants. But now she's saying si. So who is she pointing at when she says si? And they said, oh, actually, maybe she's pointing at Joseph himself. See this guy here? Look what he's trying to do to us. And that then evolves into the idea that, okay, so there must have been a gathering of women. And then Joseph was, even though he'd run away, he was sort of present at the same time. And
is the Hebrew conjugation of the plural, does it distinguish between, fa'alu and fa'alna like Arabic does, like the feminine plural and the masculine plural verb conjugation? So yes. When you're saying the imperative ra'u in Hebrew, does that refer to the collective plural of both genders? Or is that a feminine plural? Okay.
No.
So why would grammarians from the Hebrew point of view think that ra'u could refer to an exclusivity of women?
Yeah. So the reason is the order in which it happens. You're right. It doesn't work grammatically. But if the first step is to say that is the us, which is in Arabic, there's no difference between the genders, right? There's no masculine us and feminine us. So if the us is he's coming to assault us, that must be the women, because obviously he wouldn't be assaulting the men. Then if she's saying see, you've already established that there's women there. So then you just say, well, okay, this must be talking about the women. It's a good point, but I don't think we don't have any evidence of how they try to deal with that. But what's interesting for me, how to reconcile that. But what's interesting to me is that, okay, so this is, you get the development of the women's story. So there's a couple of points which I think are worth thinking about. So there's firstly, did this incident historically, right? Did this incident actually happen? If we can kind of see how the story evolves over time and is developed to kind of explain things in the text over time, what actually happened? And for me, that's not a very interesting question. Much more interesting is what do the different versions of the story do with that incident, what kind of works best in terms of bringing out, instead of creating a coherent story and in sort of bringing out the points of the story. Now, the Quranic version is unique in that it pushes the story to after the confrontation with Potiphars. If you look at the biblical text that we're reading, so far she hasn't confronted her husband. Her husband isn't in the picture yet. which means that this entire women incident is happening before the husband comes into the picture. And that's across all the different versions of the story. That's where it happens. That's before the husband comes into the picture. You get this incident of the party of the women. The Quran is unique in pushing it to a later date, which I think is really interesting because it definitely is much more coherent. Because the idea that he's just run away, she's held onto his shirt, and then she has a party of women. All the while she's got the shirt and calls him in. She's still got the shirt, and this whole women kind of debacle happens. And then her husband comes and shows him the shirt. It leaves just too long a gap between the assault and her keeping this shirt with her this whole time, and then eventually confronting her husband. What the Quran does is show that everything just sort of happens very very kind of rapidly, as you would expect in kind of a pressure situation that she finds herself in, and then she has time later to think about how am I going to deal with the fallout. Yeah,
even the arsalat ilayhinna and a'tadat, like there's preparation and timing.
Yeah, because all of that preparation timing, it does not work here. Like, it's really incoherent, I think, to have that here in this whole narrative where things are moving very rapidly. Suddenly she throws a women's party.
But the women's party portion isn't mentioned here explicitly. So what you're saying is that that added on portion of Jewish tradition is used to be inserted as an add-on, like a tafsiri note almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Before the story moves on. That's what they've done?
That's right. That's what they've done. But I'm saying by doing that, they've kind of it kind of evolved as a result of trying to explain something in the text. Why does it say us? Who is the sea that she's referring to? But it creates a really interesting kind of divergence in the story, which just doesn't fit here. And what's interesting is all of the versions of the story that are recorded in the Hebrew tradition have this incident really too early, I think, for it to make sense, right? That there's attempted assault, then she throws this banquet for the women, and then she confronts her husband. And the Quran uniquely pushes it later, which I think just makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to interject, I remember now the point that it was slipping my mind at the moment, the earlier portion where we were talking about the witness among the servants and the silence of the servants. And Sohaib and I also recall, Sohaib, we discussed that it seems as though the shahida shahidun min ahliha, from the language of it, and then her own use of the word ahl, man arada bi ahlika su'an, seems to maybe not explicitly, but implicitly suggest that the word ahl is not referring to servants necessarily, and that there is a silence on behalf of the servants. And the silence of the servants is important for other reasons too. One, you suggested that I didn't even think of, sure. The other being that any one of the servants incriminating the owner of the house or the missus is actually a death sentence, or at the very least a firing or a flogging, because it looks bad politically. So their silence would actually be very logical. And someone, and in the Quran's account, the person who does speak out and say, look, come on, this is obvious, and goes out of their way to spell it out because of the repetition, and really the unusual repetition. A couple of observations about that. The first of them is that, in a pressure situation like this, you don't expect someone to repeat phrases like in kana qamisuhu qudda min qawlin fasadaqat wa in kana qamisuhu, like it's really spelled out, right? So what that seems to suggest, Allahu A'lam, what that seems to suggest is that there is a high pressure situation. Everybody's hysterical, or maybe even the man of the house is losing his mind, and someone says, "Listen, everybody, calm down. Let me just spell this out for you a little bit. Just listen, hear me out a second. If the shirt," and it kind of like a calming effect, slow down conversation. Now the ahl, our theory was that it would probably have to be someone whose voice who can say this and even attributed words like fakadhabat, sadaqat, like he could say that about her and get away with it. Right. So it has to be someone that, and then someone who can speak like that and not be cut off when they're talking. It would have to be someone of some kind of weight alongside Potiphar. So maybe it's actually a family member of hers. Maybe this happens immediately. They find the husband at the door, but other family members are visiting at the time, or somebody came also, and they gather towards the commotion later on, or maybe in a few seconds. Or there's, Yusuf Aisam is hauled away, and he's like wringing his hands, like, what am I going to do? And then somebody has a friend of his has a voice of reason that belongs to her family, or whatever it is. But there does seem to be a departure from the servants talking. That much is definitely in parallel with the Genesis account. That's what it seemed to us. So, did I miss anything in what we discussed?
No, just I mean, I don't know if you did it at the time, but obviously then you've got the parallel with the Mu'min min Ali Fir'aun, the same situation where someone would have to be in a position of being listened to and not being cut off. That has to be something like a family member. Right. I can't remember now whether I've seen any of the Mufassirin suggesting that the Shahid was the Aziz himself. I have a feeling I've seen it. It's not a common opinion or a popular opinion, certainly.
It seems odd from the language point of view, though.
It does, but you know what? I'm just reminded now about in Surah An-Naml, we have various opinions about who was the الذي عنده علم من الكتاب. Sulaiman alayhi salam asked his majlis, he asked his gathering, who's going to bring me the throne of Bilqis? And then you have قال عفريت من الجن, you have this powerful jinni, he says, I'm going to bring it to you before you get up from your place. And then the next ayah says قال الذي عنده علم من الكتاب أنا آتيك به قبل أن يرتد إليك طرفك, which would mean the one who was given knowledge from the book said, I will bring it to you before your glance returns to you, right, in the blink of an eye.
Right.
Now, on that occasion, there are actually several opinions. One of them is it was a human being who was like one of the ministers of Sulaiman. Another view was the angel Jibreel alayhi salam who said this. This is the one who was given knowledge from the book, meaning like in that case the heavenly book. But some said, in fact, this is considered by some of the Mufassirin to be the correct opinion, that it was Sulaiman himself, right? So although this unusual kind of description is used, الذي عنده علم من الكتاب, it was just to draw attention to the fact that because Sulaiman alayhi salam had the knowledge from scripture, that was more powerful than what the jinn possessed. The point is that sometimes this, if we accepted that, it would mean you've got this unusual situation where a person is described in a particular way in the middle of a story where they were already being talked about in another way. So it wouldn't be impossible to transpose that sort of
So here's where I see the divergence between those two parallels. The الذي عنده علم من الكتاب is in fact an الذي, which the proper distinction would make it even far more plausible to say, okay, well, he was talked about in this way, and he is the one who had knowledge of the book. So it seems more plausible a reading. But shahida shahidun min ahliha, the nakira reintroduction of someone who's already been introduced, that seems like a jump, right? How can he be sayyidaha and then become a shahidun? He would be ash-shahid min ahliha.
Yeah.
Anything, right?
Yeah, I am inclined to agree with you. And again, sometimes when you think aloud about something and you realize that, well, if the Mufassirin didn't go there, maybe there's a good reason they didn't go there. So maybe the idea has occurred to people and then they realized, hold on, there's something about that doesn't work. But there is, I have to say, in the tafsir tradition, there is a lot of equivocation around the shahid. Some said the shahid was a person, and some said the shahid actually refers to the shirt itself. And they sort of elaborated on it in that way. Wow. Some just, they sort of, when they're telling the story, they tell you, the Aziz arrived and he had the cousin of his wife with him, right? So they sort of put that in there so that when you come to it, you already have established in your mind the idea that he had someone with him. Because otherwise, where did the shahid suddenly pop up from? That's the sort of question that arises.
So it's interesting that you brought that up because, as we're discussing this comparative analysis, I think some issues in tafsir and issues in Quranic analysis it's an opportunity to bring some of those things up. So the idea that one of her family members, that has been suggested in tafsir literature, that it was one of her cousins or something that came along with her, which
wise man who had such insight and
Right. So that's a plausible theory.
Sure.
However, here's where the challenge lies. There's no suggestion of that nature in biblical tradition. And that's one. So this is not an Israyliyyat, possibly, right? And then we don't have any hadith tradition to suggest that. So then the question arises, where did this suggestion emanate from? If it's not coming from the Israyliyyat, and it's not coming from hadith tradition, what possibilities are there that the cousin theory is suggested in classical tafsir? What's the source of it? Right? And what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, even when we say Israyliyyat, so the Judeo-Christian narrations, something can be from Israyliyyat, and yet it's not in the Bible.
Right.
It could be in the Bible, it could be in other literature, or it could have just been oral traditions, which all falls under what we call Israyliyyat. So if
so that's one theory.
So when the ayat were being revealed and the Muslims started talking about it and exchanging their ideas and their thoughts about it, they will have also spoken to those amongst the Muslims who had converted, former Jews, former Christians, whatever, and they would have had their own take on it, and those things would have been informed by their own tradition. But by all means, it can also be informed by inference and ideas, because that's what people always have done. They read the Quran, they make inferences, very good inferences, but those things then they become, they come down to us as riwayat. So then you have in our books of tafsir, it will say ruya, it was narrated that it was the cousin, and so on and so on. But that like to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's not like a hadith and something which you then assume came from wahi. It just means that it was an accepted idea, it was circulated, should be looked at, should be taken into consideration, could well be right, but also could well be wrong, because there's no reason to suppose it has to be right.
Right. What are your thoughts on that, Saqib, before we continue?
Yeah, so just the point on the Israyliyyat, so I agree with Sheikh Suhaib. We have to have a broader understanding of what we mean by Israyliyyat. These aren't necessarily sort of Talmudic stories, which was, I guess, what might come into one's mind when you talk about Israyliyyat. There were different versions of stories that were around in both the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition, and all of that is important. What's interesting is, it is the case that very frequently you can trace something. So not talking about the Quran, I'm talking about just the tafsir of the Quran. You can trace things in tafsir back to a Talmudic source or to a Christian source, but there are times where you just can't do that. So I was reading an article on the Lima Tu'dhuna when Musa alayhi salam, the ayah. Sorry, the other one. لا تكونوا كالذين آذوا موسى فبرأه الله مما قالوا. So the one of the opinions in tafsirs is that these were people who, amongst the Israelites, who claimed that Sayyidina Musa Islam had some deformity, had some genital deformity, and that's why he wouldn't bathe in public with everyone else. And so what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did was, when he was taking a bath, he caused the rock to run away to reveal Musa Islam's kind of perfect form or whatever. So, I mean, it's a funny story, but it's exactly the kind of story you'd expect to find in the Israyliyyat or in the Talmudic tradition or something, but it's just not there. So you do sometimes just draw a blank. You just don't know where the stuff is coming from. So it's, we have to remember what gets retained in written form is just a fraction of what was around orally at the time. And you just have to make do with what you have.
There is a whole, I shouldn't neglect to mention, it had slipped my mind there. There is actually a set of hadiths around this incident and the shahid as well. But there are some issues with those hadiths. There are hadiths which are pointing to the shahid being a baby. So one of the opinions in tafsir is that the one who spoke was actually a baby who spoke in the cradle. And of course, we know about this kind of miraculous happening being associated with other incidents. Isa alayhi salam, of course, the most obvious example. And then there are some hadiths that say there were only 3 babies who spoke in all of history, and then 3 of them are named. And then there are other versions of that that say there were 4 babies that spoke in the cradle. And then in that they say the hadith says, and that's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, that shahid shahid min ahli Imrat al-Aziz, basically that person is named. And but at the same time, the Mufassirin didn't really go with that as their for the most part, they don't seem to have adopted it. So you've got to then inquire as to why is that not, why do we not just take that as the statement, given that there's a hadith? And part of the reason is because on that subject, there are actually multiple hadiths, even if that one that mentions the Shahid Yusuf seems to be, according to some muhaddithin standards, actually considered authentic or close to authentic, as Imam Suyuti himself argued. But at the same time, there are other hadiths that are stronger than it, which limit it to 3. So there seems to be some kind of inconsistency between the hadith. And then I think for other reasons as well, the Mufassirin intended not to take this as given. It would raise other kind of questions as well. Like, okay, if there's a witness who is actually a baby speaking from the cradle,
that's where the problem lied. Remember when we talked about it?
You wouldn't need to say very much, right? You wouldn't have to make all this shirt business explanation. You would just have to say, she's lying, and everyone would say, well, a baby said it. I mean, you trust the baby, not the trust the baby, but it's more.
I don't think the she or the shirt would any longer be an issue if there was a baby talking.
Like, I mean, everyone would, turn. What are you saying? Oh, that's so lovely. But also, it would be
first words.
I mean, clearly, what the point is, and the Mufassirin talk like this. I know I'm making light of it, but the Mufassirin do explain that if the baby spoke, it would be clear that this is a miracle. And what is said by a miracle baby is taken to be fact, right? So they wouldn't have to go through all this all the
investigative process. Yeah.
So, but that is is mentioned in the tafasir. I should just point that out. But it's an interesting example where there's hadiths, but the hadiths don't necessarily take prominence and precedence over all the other considerations and opinions.
It's remarkable.
Just one other thing for me. So. There is a pre-Islamic poem by Narsai. Joseph Whitson brings it up in his thesis, where after she shows Potiphar the shirt, he asks her, "Who is your shahid, who will bear witness on your behalf?" So his husband demands from her that she brings, and it's the same. It's a cognate word that's used. So sahdiq, who is your witness that he did this thing? Because he says, because I don't want to be unjust towards him. So if that's in the background, it sort of fits in what you're saying. He's asking her for a witness. So then shahid min ahliha. So she brings the witness, and the witness kind of turns out, ironically, to kind of
that backfired.
It backfires quite badly.
Wow.
And it fits in what just said earlier, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ.
Maybe your speaker's cutting out. Something happened to your speaker or your mic.
I was saying that actually helps to understand and connect the sequence of events. If you see
the phrasing, شَاهِدٌ مِنْ أَهْلِهَا.
So maybe that means that she did call on someone to speak on her behalf.
Yeah.
And that's really reading the ayat.
And what's really nice is just before that, when she was trying to entice Yusuf, he warned her, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And then you kind of see an illustration of that, how she's trying to bring supporting evidence, and it just completely falls flat. It kind of things get turned on her. So it's a really nice illustration of لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Kind of, I told you this would happen.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And what was the language used for the demand to produce her own shahid?
So I've got this from Joseph Whitstone's translation. So Potiphar said, "Who is your witness?" So sahdiq. So this is it
sounds like shahid too.
Yeah, your witness. It's a cognate word that he did this thing. For I do not wish to contend with him unjustly. His garment is in your hands, yet behold, you cry that you are vanquished. So he's recognizing, look, you've got his garment. He hasn't got your garment, right? So you've got his garment, and at the same time, you're claiming that he's treated you unjustly, and I do not wish to believe you, since you are not.
And where is this?
This is Narsai. So this is East, very senior East Syriac Christian. He was sort of the head of the school of Nisibis for a while, and he dies. I'm going to get this wrong. Middle of the 6th century or early 6th century, so 530s. I'm going to say, Yeah, I might get those dates wrong, but yeah. So he's definitely, and he's a very senior figure in the Nestorian church. So certainly anything that he's producing will have been sort of well known and well circulated.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to read on. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And she said, and she laid out his garment by her until his master returned to his house, and she spoke to him things of this sort, saying, the Hebrew slave came into me, whom you brought us to play with me. And so when I raised my voice and called out, he left his garment by me and fled outside. And it happened when his master heard his wife's words, which he spoke to him, saying, things of this sort your slave has done to me, he became incensed. And Joseph's master took him and placed him in the prison house, the place where the king's prisoners were held.
Right.
Okay.
So a couple of things there. So it's one of the things that seems to have been an early observation is why he was imprisoned. I mean, if he's sexually assaulted the wife of his master as a slave, you would expect capital punishment. I mean, you could kill a slave anyway without much repercussion in the ancient world, and one who tried to do something like this would definitely be facing that kind of punishment. So then why is it that he's imprisoned? And one of the explanations that was already being floated before Islam is that Potiphar actually knew what was going on. So even though he sort of flies into this rage,
Interesting.
He knows the score, and so he doesn't want to kill the guy, and so he has him imprisoned instead.
That was actually a theory being floated around.
Yeah. So it's in Genesis.
Okay, my English is poor. He became incensed. Is that enraged? Is that the?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Flew into a rage.
Okay. And so there is like you said, there is a repetition of what she says to him repeatedly. Interestingly, the Quran did that in the emphasis of how she spoke out in a phonetic form, the mudud in her claim.
You can't make me do it again.
No, that was pretty awesome when you did it. And the other part of it, I was kind of trying to capture parallels, the use of us in the biblical account, the use of ma jaza'u man arada bi ahlika in this account. Here she doesn't actually suggest what should happen to him.
Right.
In the Quran that she does, illa an yushana'u adhabun alim. Right? I was a bit confused about her words in the Quran, and I want your take on that again, Suhaib, only because Adabun Alim seems like option 1, and Anyushtana should be option 2, because you know what? He should get tortured or at least thrown in jail. Like the way I was looking at it, right? Or another way of thinking about it is he should be thrown in jail. Better yet, he should be tortured. You know, but there is a progression, or if she's in such an outrage that her primary suggestion should be that he should be killed or tortured or something, physically harmed, and then the lesser of the two punishments is throw him in a jail cell. So I wanted your thoughts on that, and I think maybe a recap of some of the tafsir points that were brought up by Mufassirin on that subject. But here, torture is not even an option. Actually, she hasn't suggested anything here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right to have the instinct that the thing that's mentioned second. I mean, okay, in the Arabic language, normally you have things appended on in order to increase the severity. So taking us back to Sulaiman alayhi salam, when he's threatening the Hudhud, he says regarding him, لأعذبنه عذابا شديدا أو لأذبحنه. So he says first, I will punish him severely, or I will slaughter him, or he will bring me a clear excuse. But the last or is a bit different. It's like right.
But the second or is an escalation of the first.
It's an escalation. So So here, Adhabun Alim could be seen in that way. Adhabun Alim
Right.
could
So it is an escalation.
because putting him in prison could also be, it could refer to, just a few days. It could be a small thing. And also, like when she says it in this way, she could intend for the two things to be combined. So it can be either one or the other or both. It doesn't have to be seen as exclusively one or the other.
Yeah.
So it's like at the very least, it's going to be this or that.
So now, just as again a comparative note, there's such a profound subtlety in the Quran, from not just this woman and her scheming, but actually the political undertones of the story. Al-Aziz and his reputation being at stake, the fact that women of the city, the elite women, are talking and they're creating a problem. The fact that his reaction is actually not that he's incensed. His reaction is actually هذا من كيدكن إن كيدكن عظيم يوسف أعرض عن هذا. Like we're missing an entire scene in the Bible that's there in the Quran. There's again there. I don't know if other versions of this in their oral traditions have anything, but he's actually not outraged or even pretending to be.
What's interesting is that like the Quran is not actually telling us what anyone's thinking. They're telling us what they said. So Allah Azza wa Jalla is telling us
right
what they said, and then we're left to understand what they were feeling when that's if
let them to say what they said.
We are among the people who believe it's important to think about what were they feeling, but the Quran doesn't tell us فَغَضِبَ sabara or anything like this. He was patient. So then the Mufassirin are doing that. They were saying, I mean, this question was asked: why does he seem to take it so chill? Right? I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not this not direct relation, right? So some of them said, you know what? He was a very patient man. كان رجلا حليما, right? Some of them said, well, you know what? He didn't have very much care about this issue. He was basically the youth. Like it's like his wife can do what she wants. He doesn't really care that much. They weren't very close. Or he basically he was uninterested in the marriage anyway. And some explained it in different ways. But I think what's interesting is what Saqib alluded to there about that theory that had floated around in Jewish circles about just an understanding that maybe this was part of her previous previous deeds or things that was known about her. And I think that helped with the Shahidun min Ahliha as well, because I think that's one thing that we had felt about the description, a witness from amongst her people or her family, was that it's someone who would have known that actually she is lying, but we need to establish that through some material means. Yeah, pun very much intended here. So then all that stuff about the shirt and the elaboration on that point about the shirt, was just to make physical something that pretty much was established as a fact. But it was a case of, because by itself, and the Mufassirin actually discussed this a bit. Imam Razi touches on it, and others discussed it. It's a bit of a debate. Like, what does it mean for the shirt to be torn from the front or the back? Does it really prove anything by itself? Because the shirt could be torn from the front in either scenario, one way or another. The shirt could be torn from the back in either scenario, one way or the other. It's not a cast iron proof by itself, but it was more something to point to, and almost to, like in the way that interrogation takes place. I've been watching some let's say before Ramadan, I was watching some kind of dramas, and the way that let's say since Ramadan, then okay. Then there's some,
it was Arturo. You're watching Arturo. Okay.
This stuff that helped
Islamic.
Or put some things in my head, but what they do is they pin down the person interrogated, and they'll throw some different bits of evidence from different directions. And part of that is just to catch the person out, because when they have no answer, maybe if they had a chance to prepare for that particular answer, they could do it. But when she had no answer for the shirt, she's literally standing there. She's got like shirt under her fingernails, right? How do you explain this DNA evidence or this these threads here? Suddenly, it's I don't have something ready for that. So again, that's maybe something different about the biblical account, where it's all putting her case together before taking it before the husband.
Brilliant. Guys, one of the things before I leave off today, so this is actually, I think we are at the same marker for, both accounts. The biblical account, I don't think there's more to say about what's going on inside, Potiphar's house, because I think from here, Genesis takes us into the prison, right? But so the episode about the women cutting their hands is just missing here. And it's only mentioned as an explanatory note elsewhere. I think it's the Mishnah or something.
No, the Mishnah. The earliest is the Midrash Tanchuma, which it's a complicated text because we're not exactly sure when it reached its final edited form. And so for the purposes of, if you're looking at Quranic studies and you're looking at, what were the versions of different stories that are also found in the Quran, what versions of them were around before the Quran, is a complicated text to work with because we're not sure if the text was around before the Quran or not. So it seems I'm not an expert on it at all, but it seems like the received opinion is that the final form of the text is definitely post-Quranic, but it captures earlier material, and then it becomes a challenge. You have to kind of reason on a case-by-case basis. Is this earlier? How did it develop, and is a particular story older or later than the Quran? Because if it's later, then it's not going to help us understand, what was in the air at the time of the Quran, because it itself in the Midrash Tanchuma might have been influenced by the Quran.
It's interesting because the reason I find that fascinating is in the Quran's account, the women cutting their hands is such a pivotal. It's in a sense even more important than the shirt, because that's the exonerating claim when he's in prison. He didn't say ask about the shirt ripped from behind. He went and said, find out what happened to those women that cut their hands. Right? So it's actually
that's really interesting. Okay.
So it's so critical from the Quran's point of view in the progression of the story and his exoneration from prison. And I'm going to be curious to find out by contrast, how is he coming out of prison in the biblical account? And is this episode entirely missing? Right? So
no spoilers.
No spoilers.
But that's really interesting. So James Kugel, who I mentioned in Potiphar's house, one of his criticisms of the Quranic account is that by moving the Assembly of Ladies incident to after the confrontation with the husband, right? The Quran is unique in doing this. He sees it as a loss of kind of dramatic effect. He sees the story as building up to the confrontation with the husband. And that's like a natural place for the story, for this part of the story to build up to. And then, the husband, the main guy,
he needs to listen to my lectures. He needs to listen to our work.
But that's really interesting from the perspective of, what happens afterwards and the fact that remains important in prison. That's really interesting.
And it's not a de-escalation. Actually, our reading of it is actually it's an exponentially more escalated circumstance because, and if you ever get a chance to talk to this fellow, you can throw this at him. When this incident happened with the shirt, the enraged party is a husband who actually arguably already knows better, right? And she's just doing something to cover her tracks because her plot failed. But now that she's been humiliated and women are talking, she doesn't just want what she originally wanted. Now she wants revenge. She wants to humiliate him. And if he was able to hold on to his dignity, fasta'sama in the Quran, the first time around, now she's going to make this multiple times worse for him. So she's got many women being thrown at him now. And then on top of that, now that they're all gentleman's agreement, they call it. I don't know what the ladies' agreement. Now we're all in it together. So you can't talk about me like I can't talk about you because we're all caught, with our hand in the cookie jar. So now I can speak my mind freely. And I can tell you, you know what? Rawattuhu an nafsihi. That's true. And yeah, he did protect his character. He did hold on tight. But you know what? If he doesn't do whatever I tell him now, you'll see what I do with him. And she's shamelessly saying this in front of the entire crowd of women. She's become far more, aggressive. She's turned the heat up on him. And on top of that, what we were discussing, وَإِلَّمْ يَفْعَلْ مَا آمُرُهُ بِهِ, and the bihi missing, the a'id missing, suggesting she's going to tell him to do like it's almost as if she's telling those ladies, have at it. And that's why even when he speaks, he says, "As-sijnu ahabbu ilayya mimma yad'unani ilayhi." So the previous ayah was he better do whatever I'm telling him. Your mind would only go to what she wanted, right?
Yeah.
But now in her vindictive sense, you wanted to hold on to your dignity. I'm going to shred your dignity bit by bit, and I'm going to have all these women do it for me.
Wow.
So that becomes yad'una. So is this not an escalation? I mean, seriously,
Wow.
read the text.
Yeah, that's
You
really
know?
interesting. Yeah. And like I said, it just from the perspective of leaving escalation to one side, the perspective of narrative flow. I mean, you can't have kind of attempted rape followed by a party, followed by confrontation with the husband. I mean, it just does not work. She's got the shirt. It's the heat of the moment. That's where you have the confrontation with the husband.
And look at that.
And then you deal with the ladies.
And it's not just you deal with the ladies. The ladies is not the end of the incident in the Quran. The end of the incident is, what's the ayah? 35? Let me pull it up. I'm not remembering the beginning words. ثم بدا لهم من بعد ما رأوا الآيات ليسجننه حتى حين. Political savvy. All these women are elite women. And this getting out is going to hurt them, but their husbands, the men, the politicians that are involved. This is becoming a bigger problem. Yusuf needs to disappear. So, بدا لهم من بعد ما رأوا الآيات. Like there's other political expediency, considerations that are leading to him being imprisoned. None of which is found here. Right? It's just he got mad, threw him in jail. And the Quran takes a completely different take on this. So it's absolutely fascinating. All right, so thank you both. We're going to pause this discussion at this point. I'm going to resume my durus on Surah Yusuf from ayah 36 onwards tomorrow, inshallah, which is the episode in the prison, when we reach the next milestone marker, which is him about to leave prison. Or at least, no, we'll do the dialogue he has inside prison. We'll see what a good logical stopping point is, and we'll resume this discussion. So I guess from tomorrow on, Sohaib, we're back to work in the daytime. Barakallahu li wa lakum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you both again.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you, Islam.